Tracy had always been the life of the party. With her infectious laughter and magnetic personality, she effortlessly drew people toward her. She had been married to Walter for almost 22 years, and to outsiders, they were the perfect couple, successful, attractive, and deeply in love. But behind closed doors, things were different. Walter was a hard-working man, often buried in his work as a software engineer. He provided Tracy with a luxurious lifestyle, an elegant home, exotic vacations, and everything she could ever want. Yet, the long hours he spent at the office left her feeling lonely and neglected. The spark that once ignited their relationship had dimmed over the years, replaced by a monotonous routine that neither seemed willing to break. Tracy often found herself staring at old photographs of their early days together, a time when they couldn't keep their hands off each other, when their laughter echoed through every room of their home. Now, those rooms felt empty, their laughter a distant memory. She missed the intimacy, the spontaneous adventures, and the late-night conversations that had once defined their relationship. Feeling trapped in a gilded cage, Tracy sought solace in the gym, a place where she could escape the confines of her lonely mansion. It was there she met Sean, a charming and muscular personal trainer who exuded confidence and charisma. Their interaction started innocently enough, friendly banter during workouts, shared smiles, and lingering glances. But what began as harmless flirting soon turned into something more. Sean had a way of making Tracy feel alive again. His compliments made her blush, and his touch sent shivers down her spine. He reminded her of the passion she once had with Walter, a passion she feared was lost forever. She found herself looking forward to her gym sessions, dressing a little more provocatively, and hoping Sean would notice. One evening, after an especially grueling workout, Sean suggested they grab a drink. Tracy hesitated for a moment, but the allure of his company was too strong to resist. They went to a nearby bar, where they shared stories and laughter over cocktails. Tracy felt a connection with Sean that she hadn't felt in years, a magnetic pull that she couldn't deny. As the night wore on, the conversation turned more intimate. Sean leaned in, his eyes locking onto hers. "Tracy, you deserve to be happy," he said, his voice low and earnest. "You deserve someone who makes you feel special." Tracy's heart raced. She knew she was crossing a line, but the temptation was too great. She leaned closer, her lips brushing against his. The kiss was electric, igniting a fire within her that she thought had long been extinguished. From that moment on, there was no turning back. Their secret rendezvous became a regular occurrence. Tracy would tell Walter she was going to the gym or meeting friends, but in reality, she was meeting Sean. They would steal away to a secluded spot where they could be alone, free from the prying eyes of the world. Their passion was intense, a whirlwind affair that made Tracy feel young and alive. Yet, with each stolen moment, guilt gnawed at the edges of her happiness. She loved Walter, or at least she loved the memory of what they once had. But the reality of their marriage was suffocating her, and Sean was her escape. She tried to push the guilt aside, convincing herself that she deserved to be happy, that she wasn't doing anything wrong. But deep down, Tracy knew that her actions were a betrayal of the vows she had made. She knew that she was risking everything for a fleeting moment of passion. As she lay in Sean's arms, the weight of her choices pressed down on her, a constant reminder of the life she was jeopardizing. The days turned into weeks, and Tracy became more adept at living her double life. She smiled at Walter, played the role of the perfect wife, while her heart raced with thoughts of Sean. But the walls were closing in, and she knew that it was only a matter of time before the facade crumbled. Tracy stood at a crossroads, torn between the man who had given her everything and the man who made her feel alive. She knew that a storm was brewing, one that would change the course of her life forever. And as she looked into Sean's eyes, she couldn't help but wonder if she was ready for the fallout that was sure to come. One evening, after another exhilarating session with Sean, Tracy decided it was time to confront Walter. The tension between them had been building, and she convinced herself that she deserved more than a cold and distant husband. The thought of Sean's warm embrace was becoming increasingly irresistible. That night, as Walter sat in the living room, exhausted from a long day at work, Tracy stood before him, her heart pounding like a drum in her chest. "Walter, we need to talk," she said, her voice trembling slightly. She tried to steady her nerves, but the weight of her confession was almost too much to bear. Walter looked up from his laptop, concern etched on his face. "What is it, Tracy?" His voice was soft, a stark contrast to the storm brewing inside her. She took a deep breath, summoning every ounce of courage she had. "I've met someone, Sean. He makes me feel things I haven't felt in years. And tonight, he's coming over. We want you to leave us alone. You can't say no to this." Walter's face turned pale, his eyes wide with shock. "What the hell are you saying, Tracy?" His voice was barely a whisper, the hurt and betrayal evident in his gaze. Before she could answer, the doorbell rang, slicing through the heavy silence. Tracy's stomach twisted into knots as she opened the door to reveal Sean, who walked in confidently, his presence filling the room with an air of arrogance. He put his arm around Tracy's waist, pulling her close. "Get out, man. We have to do a lot of wild things, right, babe?" Sean said with a smirk, his tone dripping with mockery. Walter's eyes darkened, his face turning a shade paler. Without a word, he pushed himself up from the couch, his movements slow and deliberate. He walked out of the room, the door closing behind him with a finality that sent a shiver down Tracy's spine. She heard the garage door open and close, the sound echoing through the house, leaving her with a growing sense of unease. Sean looked at Tracy, a grin spreading across his face. "Well, that was easier than I thought. Now, it's just us." Tracy stood there, feeling the weight of her decision crashing down on her. The silence in the room was deafening, each second stretching into eternity. She could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of cars passing by outside. It was as if time itself had frozen, leaving her stranded in the aftermath of her choices. "Are you sure about this, Tracy?" Sean asked, his voice cutting through the silence. "You know, once he's out of the picture, there's no turning back." Tracy nodded, the reality of her actions sinking in. "I know," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I can't go on like this, living a lie. I need to feel alive again, and Sean, you make me feel that way." Sean stepped closer, his hand reaching out to gently touch her cheek. "You deserve to be happy, Tracy, and I promise you, we'll make sure tonight is unforgettable." Sean made himself at home, pouring drinks and turning on music. The soft strains of a jazz melody filled the room, creating a warm, intimate atmosphere. Tracy watched him move around the kitchen, trying to shake off the nagging feeling in her chest. She had convinced herself that this was what she wanted, that Sean was the key to reclaiming her happiness. Yet, as she accepted the glass he handed her, a chill ran down her spine. "To new beginnings," Sean toasted, clinking his glass against hers. His eyes sparkled with excitement, oblivious to the turmoil brewing inside her. Tracy forced a smile, taking a sip of the wine. The rich, velvety taste did little to calm her nerves. "To new beginnings," she echoed, though her voice lacked conviction. They moved to the living room, where Sean's infectious energy soon had them dancing. His hands roamed her body, pulling her close as they swayed to the music. Tracy tried to lose herself in the moment, to focus on the thrill of his touch, but her mind kept drifting back to Walter. She couldn't forget the look of utter devastation on his face as he walked out the door. "Relax, babe," Sean whispered in her ear, sensing her tension. "He's gone. It's just you and me tonight." Tracy nodded, leaning into him as they danced. She wanted to believe him, to embrace the freedom he promised. But the guilt and unease gnawed at her, growing stronger with each passing minute. She felt as if she were standing on the edge of a precipice, one misstep away from plunging into an abyss. "Are you okay?" Sean asked, pulling back to look into her eyes. His brow furrowed with concern. "I'm fine," she lied, forcing another smile. "Just a bit overwhelmed, I guess." Sean chuckled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Don't worry about him. You deserve to be happy, and tonight is all about us." Tracy wanted to believe him, to let go of her doubts and fully embrace the new path she had chosen. But the memory of Walter's silent departure haunted her, casting a shadow over her newfound liberation. They settled on the couch, Sean's arm draped casually over her shoulders. He turned on the television, finding a light-hearted comedy that filled the room with laughter. Tracy snuggled closer to him, trying to draw comfort from his warmth. But no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The minutes stretched into hours, and the sense of unease only grew stronger. Tracy's mind raced with thoughts of Walter, where he had gone, what he was thinking, and whether he would ever forgive her. She glanced at her phone, half expecting a call or a message from him, but the screen remained dark. Sean noticed her distraction, his fingers gently caressing her arm. "Hey, you're not here with me," he said softly. "What's going on?" Tracy sighed, unable to meet his gaze. "I don't know. I feel like I've made a huge mistake." Sean frowned, his grip tightening slightly. "What do you mean? We're finally together, Tracy. This is what we wanted." "I know," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "But I can't stop thinking about Walter. The way he looked at me when I told him about us. I've never seen him so hurt." Sean's expression hardened, a flash of annoyance crossing his face. "He'll get over it. You can't keep living your life for him, Tracy. You deserve to be happy." Tracy nodded, wiping away a tear. "I just wish it didn't have to be like this. I didn't want to hurt him." Sean sighed, pulling her closer. "Sometimes, you have to break free to find your happiness. Walter will move on, and so will you. But tonight, let's focus on us." Tracy tried to take comfort in his words, but the knot in her stomach refused to loosen. She felt as if she were living in a dream, the reality of her actions not yet fully sinking in. As the night wore on, the laughter and flirtation between them felt increasingly hollow, overshadowed by the gravity of what she had done. She closed her eyes, leaning her head against Sean's shoulder. The music played softly in the background, a gentle reminder of the night they were supposed to share. But no matter how hard she tried, Tracy couldn't escape the feeling that this calm was merely the prelude to a storm, one that would change their lives forever. Hours passed, and just as Tracy started to let her guard down, she heard the garage door open again. The sound, so familiar and yet so out of place, sent a jolt of fear through her. Her heart raced, and she sat up, her body tense. Walter's footsteps echoed down the hallway, each step amplifying her dread. He appeared in the doorway, his face an unreadable mask. "Walter, what are you doing?" Tracy asked, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and guilt. Walter didn't answer. He held something in his hand, and as he stepped closer, Tracy's eyes widened in horror. It was a gun. "Walter, no!" she screamed, backing away, her body shaking with terror. Sean, sensing the gravity of the situation, stepped in front of her, trying to act brave. "Hey, man, let's talk about this," he said, his voice steady but his eyes betraying his fear. Walter's voice was cold and steady, a sharp contrast to the chaos in the room. "You come into my house, disrespect my marriage, and now you want to talk? Get out of my way." Sean hesitated for a moment, then lunged at Walter, his body moving with the desperation of a man trying to protect the woman he loved. But Walter was ready. With a swift, practiced move, he knocked Sean to the ground. The sound of Sean hitting the floor echoed through the room, mingling with Tracy's screams. "Walter, please, don't do this," Tracy cried, her voice breaking as she watched the man she once loved become a stranger before her eyes. Walter's gaze never wavered. His eyes were cold, devoid of the warmth and love that had once defined their relationship. He raised the gun, his hand steady. "You betrayed me, Tracy. You tore our life apart for this," he said, gesturing towards Sean, who lay on the floor, groaning in pain. Sean struggled to get up, his face contorted with anger and fear. "You're insane," he spat, his voice thick with defiance. "Insane?" Walter echoed, a bitter smile twisting his lips. "You haven't seen anything yet." Tracy's mind raced, searching for a way to diffuse the situation. "Walter, we can work this out. Please, just put the gun down. We can talk," she pleaded, tears streaming down her face. Walter's eyes flicked to her, and for a moment, she thought she saw a flicker of the man she used to know. But it was gone as quickly as it had appeared. "There's nothing left to talk about," he said, his voice hard and unyielding. Sean, seizing the moment of distraction, pushed himself up and lunged at Walter again. This time, he managed to knock the gun from Walter's hand. The weapon clattered to the floor, sliding across the room. Both men dove for it, their bodies colliding in a furious struggle. Tracy watched in horror, her body frozen with fear. The sounds of their struggle filled the room, grunts, curses, the thud of fists meeting flesh. She knew she had to do something, but her mind was paralyzed with terror. Finally, Sean managed to wrest the gun from Walter's grip. He stood, panting, the gun now in his hand. He pointed it at Walter, his eyes wild with fear and rage. "Get out, man. Get out of here before I do something we'll all regret," he said, his voice trembling. Walter looked at him, then at Tracy. His expression was a mix of anger, betrayal, and something else, something that looked like heartbreak. Slowly, he raised his hands in surrender. "You think this is over," he said, his voice low and menacing. "It's not." Sean gestured towards the door with the gun. "Go. Now." Walter backed away, his eyes never leaving Tracy's. "You'll regret this," he said, his voice a chilling promise. He turned and walked out of the room, his footsteps echoing through the silent house. Tracy collapsed onto the couch, her body shaking with sobs. Sean rushed to her side, wrapping his arms around her. "It's okay, babe. It's over," he whispered, trying to soothe her. But as Tracy looked into his eyes, she knew that it was far from over. The storm had only just begun, and the calm that had briefly settled over them was merely the prelude to the chaos that was about to engulf their lives. Then in a flash, Walter appeared again from nowhere with another gun and shot to Sean. "No, Walter, no," Tracy screamed. "You're next, bitch," Walter said angrily and ran away from house. The chaos that followed was a blur. The piercing sound of gunshots echoed through the house, shattering the eerie silence that had settled after Walter's departure. Tracy's scream ripped through the night as she dropped to her knees beside Sean's lifeless body. The horror of what had just transpired left her paralyzed. Neighbors, drawn by the commotion, peered out of their windows, whispering in hushed tones as the once peaceful neighborhood became the epicenter of a nightmare. Red and blue lights flashed, casting an ominous glow over the scene as the police arrived. The officers moved quickly, their training evident in their swift, coordinated actions. "Ma'am, step back," an officer shouted, pulling Tracy away from Sean's body. She stumbled, tears streaming down her face, her mind unable to comprehend the brutality of the night's events. Walter stood a few feet away, the gun still in his hand, his face a mask of rage and despair. He didn't resist as the officers approached him, disarming and handcuffing him with practiced efficiency. His eyes, once filled with warmth and love, were now hollow, reflecting a man who had lost everything. Tracy was taken into custody for questioning, her hands trembling as she was led to a squad car. The cold metal of the handcuffs bit into her wrists, a stark reminder of her fall from grace. The once luxurious and carefree life she had known was now in ruins, replaced by a nightmare she could never have imagined. At the police station, Tracy sat in a sterile interrogation room, the harsh fluorescent lights accentuating her disheveled appearance. An officer sat across from her, his expression stern but not unkind. He slid a cup of water towards her, but she barely noticed it. "Mrs. Walters, can you tell us what happened tonight?" the officer asked, his voice calm and measured. Tracy's voice shook as she recounted the events, her words punctuated by sobs. I never meant for any of this to happen. I just wanted to feel alive again. Sean, he made me feel things I hadn't felt in years. Walter, he just walked in, and then there were gunshots. Oh God, Sean." The officer took notes, his face betraying no emotion. "And your husband, Walter? Did he threaten you or Sean before the shooting?" Tracy's mind raced, trying to piece together the fragmented memories. "He was so angry. I've never seen him like that. He said we disrespected him, and then Sean tried to defend me, But Walter, he shot him. He shot him. Hours passed, and Tracy was eventually released. But the nightmare was far from over. The media swarmed their once quiet neighborhood, hungry for details about the tragic love triangle that had culminated in bloodshed. Reporters camped outside her home, their cameras ready to capture every moment of her descent into infamy. Tracy's life, once filled with luxury and ease, was now a maelstrom of public humiliation, legal battles, and haunting memories. Friends and acquaintances distanced themselves, their support replaced by judgment and gossip. The woman who had once been the life of the party was now the subject of scandal and pity. Walter faced a trial that captivated the nation. The courtroom was packed with spectators and media, all eager to witness the downfall of a man pushed to the brink. Tracy testified, her voice trembling as she recounted the events of that fateful night. She watched as the man she had once loved was sentenced, his fate sealed by a moment of unimaginable rage. Tracy sat in the courtroom, her body rigid with tension, as the events of that fateful night were recounted in gruesome detail. The prosecution painted Walter as a cold-blooded killer, while his defense hinged on the emotional turmoil and betrayal he had endured. Tracy's own testimony was a key part of the narrative, her words dissected and analyzed by both sides. As the days turned into weeks, the trial became a media sensation. Journalists and onlookers filled the courtroom, eager for every sordid detail. Tracy felt their eyes on her, their judgment pressing down on her like a physical weight. The whispered conversations and pointed glances were a constant reminder of her fall from grace. Walter sat stoically, his face a mask of controlled emotion. The man she had once loved seemed like a stranger now, his eyes hollow and devoid of warmth. Each time their gazes met, Tracy felt a pang of guilt and sorrow, a reminder of the life they had destroyed together. The jury deliberated for days, the tension in the courtroom palpable. Tracy could barely eat or sleep, her mind racing with the possibilities of what the verdict might bring. When the jury finally returned, the silence was deafening. The judge called for order, and the foreman stood to deliver the verdict. "We find the defendant, Walter Harper, guilty of second-degree murder." A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. Tracy's heart sank as the words echoed in her mind. Walter showed no reaction, his face as impassive as ever. The judge pronounced the sentence, a long prison term with no possibility of parole for the first 20 years. Walter was led away in handcuffs, his eyes meeting Tracy's one last time before he disappeared from view. Now alone and shunned by society, Tracy struggled to rebuild her life. The luxury and ease that once defined her existence were gone, replaced by a daily grind of survival and self-reflection. The guilt and shame weighed heavily on her, a constant reminder of the choices she had made and the lives she had irrevocably changed. She sold their opulent home, using the proceeds to move to a new city where she hoped to start fresh. The anonymity of a new place offered some solace, but the scars of that night never truly healed. Every day was a battle against the memories that haunted her, the sound of gunshots, Sean's lifeless body, and Walter's hollow gaze replaying in her mind. Tracy found a modest apartment and took a job as a receptionist at a small firm. The work was monotonous, but it provided a semblance of normalcy. Her colleagues were polite but distant, their interactions tinged with the curiosity of her past. She kept to herself, her once vibrant personality now subdued and cautious. Therapy became a crucial part of her routine. Each session was a painful excavation of her psyche, forcing her to confront the choices that led to her downfall. Her therapist, Dr. Mitchell, was patient and empathetic, guiding her through the labyrinth of her emotions. "Tracy, healing takes time. You need to be patient with yourself," Dr. Mitchell often reminded her. "I don't know if I can ever forgive myself," Tracy would reply, tears welling up in her eyes. Forgiveness is a process. It's not about excusing what happened, but finding a way to move forward. Despite the therapeutic guidance, Tracy's nights were plagued with restless sleep and vivid nightmares. She often woke up in a cold sweat, Sean's face or Walter's rage haunting her dreams. The loneliness was pervasive, a stark contrast to the social butterfly she once was. Years passed, Tracy often found herself reflecting on her past, her thoughts drifting back to the life she once had. She sat alone in her modest apartment. She had long since abandoned the luxuries that once defined her life. The opulent home, the expensive cars, and the extravagant parties were now distant memories, overshadowed by the fateful night that changed everything. She had traded her gilded cage for a simpler existence, one where every day was a battle to find peace and purpose. Tracy tried to find solace in small things, a good book, a walk in the park, the warmth of the sun on her face. She began volunteering at a local shelter, hoping to give back in some way, and perhaps find a sliver of redemption. The act of helping others provided a fleeting sense of purpose, though it did little to quell the deep-seated remorse she felt. In moments of quiet reflection, Tracy realized too late the value of what she had lost. The thrill of her affair with Sean, the excitement and passion that had once seemed so irresistible, now felt hollow and meaningless. It was a fleeting pleasure that paled in comparison to the stability and love she once had with Walter. Her betrayal had led to ruin, not just for her, but for everyone involved. She remembered the early days of her marriage, the way Walter would look at her with adoration and tenderness. They had shared dreams and built a life together, a partnership that had once been the envy of their friends. But as the years passed, the demands of Walter's career and Tracy's growing restlessness had driven a wedge between them. Instead of seeking to mend their bond, she had sought solace in the arms of another, a choice that had led to unimaginable consequences. Tracy's thoughts often returned to the trial, the look of devastation in Walter's eyes as the verdict was read, and the moment he was led away in handcuffs. The image of Sean lying lifeless on the floor haunted her, a stark reminder of the chaos and destruction her actions had unleashed. The sound of gunshots, the acrid smell of gunpowder, and the cold, metallic taste of fear lingered in her mind, a nightmare from which she could never fully escape. In her solitude, Tracy found a sliver of redemption. She dedicated her life to helping others avoid the same mistakes she had made. She volunteered at shelters, counseled those going through marital strife, and shared her story with anyone willing to listen. It was a small comfort, knowing that her experience could perhaps save someone else from a similar fate. One afternoon, as she was leaving the shelter, a young woman approached her. "Are you Tracy Harper?" she asked, her voice tentative. Tracy nodded, bracing herself for the inevitable curiosity or judgment. "I read about your story," the woman continued. "I just wanted to thank you. Hearing what you went through helped me make a different choice. I was on the verge of leaving my husband for someone else, but your story made me realize what I stood to lose." Tracy felt a lump form in her throat. "I'm glad it helped," she replied softly. "I made a lot of mistakes, and if sharing them can help others avoid the same pain, then maybe some good can come from it." The woman smiled and squeezed Tracy's hand before walking away. Moments like these gave Tracy a sense of purpose, a reason to keep moving forward despite the shadows of her past. But even in her moments of redemption, the memories of that night remained ever present. She would often wake in the middle of the night, her heart pounding, as the echoes of gunshots reverberated in her mind. The look in Walter's eyes, a mixture of anger, betrayal, and profound sadness, haunted her dreams. It was a pain she carried with her always, a reminder of the price she had paid for her moment of indiscretion. As the years continued to pass, Tracy learned to live with her regrets. She found solace in her work and in the small acts of kindness she offered to others. She became a quiet force for good in her community, known not for her past mistakes, but for her efforts to make amends. In the end, Tracy learned to live with the echoes of her past, finding a fragile peace in the routine of her new life. The scars remained, both seen and unseen, a testament to the choices that had irrevocably altered her path. And as the world moved on, Tracy continued to navigate the wreckage of her life, forever marked by the betrayal that led to ruin.